Today, a nation remembers those who died in 2 world wars. But remembrance for many in these islands is not limited to any one day in the calendar. It is an ongoing sense of sadness and loss, and a pain of loneliness that grows only sharper with the passing of the years. Elsie Harrison's husband, Tom, volunteered for the army as the war clouds gathered in the summer of 1939. They'd been married 3 years before, when they were both 26. Tom's last home leave was in the spring of 1941. He waved Elsie goodbye, set off on his motorbike to rejoin his unit, within a few days embarked for the Far East. She was never to see him again. Bill Coates joined the Merchant Navy in 1939. As a deck boy, he was 19. He served on 14 merchantmen during the Second World War, was torpedoed in 1941, and spent 6 days adrift in a lifeboat. Later, he was one of 9 survivors when his ship with a cargo of ammunition was blown up off North Africa. He was deafened and badly burned in the explosion. In the town where he was born, South Shields, he meets his friends at the Legion Club. A born survivor, in the smoke and the banter, he finds his memories of shipmates lost at sea over 40 years ago are still vivid. Squadron leader George Benyon's DFC is 72. In 1940, he was in his 20s, flying Spitfires during the Battle of Britain. Born at Stoke-on-Trent, he had joined the RAF straight from school. In the 2 months from the end of July to the end of September 1940, George flew 3 dozen sorties, was shot down 4 times, and shot up on 2 other occasions. At 5 to 3 on the afternoon of Tuesday, the 1st of October, he was shot down for the last time just north of Brighton. He managed to bail out, although severely wounded, landed at Dunstall's farm. He lost an eye, had one side of his face refashioned by the great Archie Mackindoe at East Grinstead, was one of 34 Battle of Britain pilots who became proud members of the Guinea Pig Club. His love, 45 years on, remains flying. He still enjoys nothing more than slipping the surly bonds of earth in his friend Bill Meynell's Tiger Moth, built just a year before the Battle of Britain was fought in these same skies. In London, at Whitehall, the scene that has hardly changed in 65 years, as thousands of all ages and backgrounds have gathered quietly to express the solemn, anonymous remembrance of a whole nation. The Cenotaph, so simple, so uncluttered with word and symbol, a memorial established in the hearts of ordinary men and women as on the solid earth. From Parliament Street, airmen of the Queen's Colour Squadron of the Royal Air Force approach behind the central band of the Royal Air Force. The young men of the youngest service very aware and proud of the rich inheritance which they share. George Benyon's memories are legion. They are sharp and clear as he looks from the old control tower at RAF Catterick, now the depot of the RAF regiment. George flew with 41 Squadron to Fighter Command, based here and for a spell at Hornchurch. From this tower and others like it at Manson, Biggin Hill, Duxford, Northolt, Tangmere, Kenley, Debden, North Weald, Exeter and Middle Wallop, the young pilots were directed into the skies above Britain. Men of 14 countries flew with the RAF in the late summer of 1940, when the fate of this nation was in the balance. At Catterick, you can still see the dispersal bays where the Spitfires awaited the scramble, the air raid shelters for the indefatigable ground crews. 537 of the few, as Churchill called them, were killed in the Battle of Britain, and 7 of those were only 18 years of age. Tom Harrison, Lance Corporal in the Corps of Military Police, was captured at the fall of Singapore in February 1942. He was transported to work as slave labor on the Railway of Death from Thailand into Burma. One man, it said, died for every sleeper laid. Tom Harrison survived for 18 months. He's buried near the bridge over the River Kwai at Kanchanaburi. 13,000 British and Australian prisoners of war and 90,000 native workers, Burmese, Tamils, Thais, Malays and Chinese, perished along the 250 miles of the railway. Bill Coates had 3 brothers who served in the Royal Navy. One was killed at Dunkirk. Now almost 66 years of age, he has seen great changes in the world of the merchant seaman. In his early 20s, he survived air attacks in the Mediterranean, submarines in the North Atlantic, and the heaving seas and the heavy icing of the dangerous convoys to Russia. He's part of a great fraternity, In 2 world wars, 8,500 British merchant ships were sunk. 15,500 men of the merchant service and the fishing fleet were lost in the Great War, and nearly 36,000 who sailed under the Red Ensign in the war which ended 40 years ago. For most of those whose business was upon the great waters, as for their brothers who were killed while serving in the Royal Navy, the unstill and awesome sea is their grey winding sheet, the ocean bed, their deep and lonely grave. Young merchant Navy cadets from the National Sea Training College in Gravesend. Bill Coates was their age in 1939. They stand to the northwest of the Cenotaph, with representatives of Her Majesty's Coast Guard. A representative of the fishing fleets will later be laying a wreath. And to the south, towards the junction with Parliament Street, stand the massed bands of the Guards Division. Under the direction, once again, of Lieutenant Colonel Richard Ridings, OBE, Senior Director of Music, Guards Division. The buglers of the Royal Marines take their place at the front of all the musicians. To the west of the Cenotaph, the Royal Navy, the senior service, is represented by 3 officers and 87 ratings. Two officers and 24 ratings from the Women's Royal Naval Service and from Queen Alexandra's Royal Navy Nursing Service. 2 officers and 50 other ranks from 42 Commando, representing Her Majesty's Royal Marines. Heart of Oak is the music. A naval officer killed 180 years ago in a battle that is now a page of history. And in the street that stretches from Nelson's Trafalgar Square to Parliament Square and Westminster, the columns of ex-servicemen far below. They march from Horse Guards along Whitehall to the sunlit Cenotaph on this cold, bitterly cold November morning. Perhaps the pages of history are catching up with us all. There's an urgency about paying one's respects to dead comrades while there's time. Certainly, the columns grow dramatically longer and not shorter with each year. Heart of Oak, The Minstrel Boy, Men of Harlech. When first I described this scene in Whitehall, the men of the First World War were the same age as these proud veterans of the Second World War are now. 1,500 more here than 2 years ago, some 6,500 braving the November chills in Whitehall this morning. Salutary, perhaps, to remind younger and more objective generations that it wasn't white-haired men gleaming with medals who went to war. It was boys in their late teens and early 20s. Many joined up because their friends were doing the same. Little could they have known or guessed the horrors that awaited them. You'll be home by Christmas, they were told, at the beginning of both wars by well-meaning families and cheerful friends. There was a certain innocence abroad in the world, and a firm belief that the cause was special, once only, and for all time. The honor of one's king and country, the defense of one's way of life, these were, after all, things that mattered, nothing more so. Few volunteers and conscripts had been beyond the shores of Britain. It was a brave adventure, tempered in the beginning only by the leave-takings, the parting waves of farewell, the crowded station platforms, the human separations common to all wars since the world began. The blind belief that whatever may happen to others, we'll be all right. The comradeship, the jokes, the jibes, the laughter, the flying in the face of fortune. And behind the couldn't-care-less smiles, the moments of sheer panic, the goodbye to a baby that will grow so soon into a stranger with a school bag, to a mother who may not be there to welcome you home. The goodbye kiss that might just be your last. The girl you leave behind to wait and to wonder if she'll ever see you again. These waited, and these came back. Perhaps they remember well today the times they wonder if they ever would. They grow older, as those they remember do not. Isle of Beauty, and now David of the White Rock. The pattern is now complete around the cenotaph. The music changes, becoming, as the minutes tick away to 11 o'clock, always more reflective. Oft in the stilly night, fond memory brings the light of other days around me. To the east of the cenotaph, in front of Richmond Terrace, the army contingent, found by an officer and 24 troopers of the Household Cavalry from the Life Guards, in dismounted review order. And beside the gleaming helmets and the white plumes of the Life Guards, an officer, 16 gunners of the King's Troop, Royal Horse Artillery in full dress uniform. Another 16 gunners will fire the guns to signal to London the beginning of the silence. Beside them, 3 officers, 57 guardsmen from the 1st Battalion Scots Guards. In guard of honor, order, wearing their greatcoats. Women's Royal Army Corps beside them, and the Queen Alexandra's Royal Army Nursing Corps. Senior Drum Major Dixie Dean of the Irish Guards stands the massed bands at ease, as now the pipers of the 1st Battalion Scots Guards play Flowers of the Forest, a timeless border lament, the words first sung by war widows almost 5 centuries ago, after the Battle of Flodden Field. A sad, haunting lament for the reckoning in human lives of battles lost and won. The mass bands are brought to attention. The music is now Nimrod from the Enigma Variations by Sir Edward Elgar. Not half a mile away from Whitehall, in the little churchyard of St. Margaret's, where 40 years ago Churchill led the procession from Parliament to give thanks for the end of the war. The garden of memories which blossoms red every November, as though grown from seeds cast there by the remembrance of tens of thousands who pass by on the busy errands of ongoing life. Neatly the crosses parade by service, by squadron, by regiment. Men of Slim's forgotten army are not forgotten now. For every cross a memory kept alive, for every memory planted this remembrance tide, the passing of another year, the inevitable passing as years go by from actual remembrance to a cherishing of what it would be folly to forget. Like a great tail plane, the memorial to the 24,000 missing at Singapore, so across the whole earth, it would seem, the memorial stones, without rank or class, equal in sacrifice, equal in honor. Today, the Duke of Kent, President of the Commonwealth War Graves Commission, has been attending a service of remembrance here at Cranji. And what do the bright-eyed children of another generation make of these monuments of history, memorials of a time before their own, of men they never knew, from a far country and another race? At Hong Kong, above the harbor, clinging to a hillside on an island almost awash with people, a British cemetery recalls the rather sad Christmas day in 1941 when Hong Kong fell. Today, a haven of peace for students with their books and for their philosophic elders waiting for the world they know to change yet again. Beside the muddy River Kwai, the pathway to the old prison camp hacked from the rainforest and the mud at Chung Kai. Here men lived 200 to each bamboo hut, sleeping in a space of 6 feet by 2 on platforms of split cane. Sickness, disease, malnutrition, despair, and the impossible physical demands of hard labor killed more than the guards. No one escaped to the jungle and lived. And yet, men nursed each other, sang and prayed, and hoped here too, and learned how little material possessions matter, or pomp or humbug. In a year after we go, it'll be jungle again, they said, but it's now a place of beauty. And some didn't leave. 2.5 miles downstream, beside the famous bridge over the River Kwai, was Kanburi Camp. At Kanchanaburi Cemetery, one of 3 along the Railway of Death, again the graves lie row on row. It's well over half a century since the hope was expressed that such sites would serve to draw the peoples of the earth together in sanity and self-control. Perhaps there is hope indeed in the fact that 5 times as many people have visited the war cemeteries nearer home in Europe in the last few years as did in the early 70s. "1,200 gardeners of the Commonwealth War Graves Commission, men and women of many nationalities, work in over 23,000 cemeteries in 140 countries with a quiet pride and dignity. It might be surprising were it not so touching, so caring, and so genuine. All this on the island of Labuan off North Borneo, where many of those buried died from a forced march in the last months of their captivity 40 years ago. Tropical blooms, an unknown soldier, and the cross of sacrifice in Labuan. In Whitehall, the processional cross, carried by Mark Stockton, the third of 3 brothers to have had this honor, precedes the children and the gentlemen of the choir of the Chapels Royal, with choir master Mr. Popplewell, children in their red tunics. And they are followed by the Chaplain-in-Chief of the Royal Air Force, the Venerable Archdeacon G.R. Narden, the Sub-Dean of the Chapels Royal, Canon Anthony Caesar, and then the Bishop of London with his crozier, who was also Dean of the Chapels Royal, the Right Reverend and Right Honourable Dr. Graham Leonard, who interrupted his arts course at Oxford to serve in the Oxford and Buckinghamshire Light Infantry during the Second World War, and his chaplain, the Reverend John Shepherd. They move to the east of the Cenotaph. The music changes to Sir Walter Davis's solemn melody. The bright sunlight casting the dark shadow of the Cenotaph along Whitehall. from the door of the former Home Office, the representatives of Parliament, the Prime Minister, Leader of the Opposition, Leader of the Liberal Party, just flew in from Canada a few hours ago, the Leader of the Ulster Unionist Party, the Leader of the Social Democratic Party, Sir Geoffrey Howe, the Foreign Secretary, with his distinctive wreath, Lord Chancellor beside him, Lord Hailsham, the Speaker, Mr. Bernard Weatherill, three former Prime Ministers, Lord Wilson, Mr. Heath and Mr. Callaghan, Mr. Thomas, the leader of Plaid Cymru, Dr. Ian Paisley is there, representing the Ulster Democratic Unionist Party, Mr. Britton, Mr. Lawson, Sir Keith Joseph, Mr. Kinnock, Mr. Steele, Mr. James Molyneux, Dr. David Owen, Sir Geoffrey Howe. The High Commissioners of 37 independent nations moved to take their place to the west of the Cenotaph, all carrying their wreaths of poppies which they will lay on behalf of their nations. The service chiefs, led by Admiral of the Fleet Sir John Fieldhouse, Chief of the Defence Staff, carrying wreaths, Admirals William Staveley and General Sir Nigel Bagnall, Air Chief Marshal Sir David Craig. Behind them, representatives of the merchant and civilian services, representatives of other religious denominations in the country. And for the first time, none of the chiefs of staff served in the Second World War, but a reminder that wars didn't end in 1945. General Sir Nigel Bagnall saw active service in Palestine, Malaya and Borneo, and men have died in Aden, Kenya, Cyprus, Korea, Northern Ireland too. Sir John Fieldhouse was C&C Fleet when the South Atlantic Task Force set sail in the April of 1982 for the Falkland Islands. All in our mind this morning, as well as those who died in the two great and agonizing world wars. The great mass of ex-servicemen, the services, the massed bands, the pavements lined with civilians of all ages. And so soon now, the silence, which will begin on the first stroke of 11 o'clock after Her Majesty the Queen has arrived in Whitehall, first suggested by an Australian journalist, Edward George Honey, in May 1919, in the London Evening News, and when the idea was formally put to King George V, it was incorporated into the first remembrance of the ending of the Great War at the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month. Her Majesty the Queen leaves the former Home Office building, walks between the Guard of Honour of Queen's Scouts, accompanied by the Duke of Edinburgh, arrived home only last evening from Madagascar, Prince Andrew, Prince Michael of Kent, the equerries in waiting carrying the royal wreaths. And when the royal princes have halted and saluted the Cenotaph, they will stand to attention, and with Her Majesty the Queen, with all assembled around the Cenotaph, with all of you watching at home, observe the 2-minute silence in which we remember those who died in 2 world wars and on active service since, those who suffer still from their wounds of body and mind, in which we ask God's blessing on those who mourn, and in which we pray for the peace of the world. Last post sounded by buglers of the Royal Marines. Major Hugh Lindsay and Her Majesty the Queen, her wreath. Which she lays now at the foot of the Cenotaph. Squadron Leader Timothy Finneran hands the wreath to Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, who lays his wreath beside Her Majesty the Queen's. Wearing the uniform of Admiral of the Fleet, and now His Royal Highness Prince Andrew has handed his wreath, his distinctive Falkland Islands wreath. The blue representing the sea, the green of the islands. 254 men lost their lives in the Falkland Islands, 248 from the three services, 6 from the Merchant Navy. And of course Prince Andrew returned from a further tour of duty in the South Atlantic, only in Dune. Major Oliver Hard hands a wreath to Prince Michael of Kent, former Major in the Royal Hussars, born in the year his father was killed, 1942. His father was killed in a flying accident on active service with the Royal Air Force in the north of Scotland. Now a wreath will be laid on behalf of Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, by Major Sir Ralph Anstruther, Treasurer and Equerry to Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth. She watches above, accompanied by the Duchess of Kent, Lord Nicholas of Windsor, King Olaf, and Princess Anne. She must have watched this scene almost 60 times through the years. Became Duchess of York only 4.5 years after the ending of the war, in which she lost a brother, had another wounded, and yet another taken prisoner. Major Jack Stenhouse of the Gordon Highlanders lays the wreath of the Prince of Wales. Prince of Wales, of course, in Washington this morning. And the Prince of Wales is Colonel-in-Chief of the Gordon Highlanders. Captain Charles Blunt, Scots Guards, lays a wreath on behalf of His Royal Highness the Duke of Kent, Colonel of the Scots Guards, flew to the Far East on Friday, and is laying a wreath at the Stone of Remembrance at Crangia Cemetery this morning in Singapore. Attending a service there with war widows of men who died in the Far East, with veterans of the Burma campaign and ex-prisoners of war. So the royal wreaths are laid on the Cenotaph at Whitehall. The services are stood at ease. The Household Cavalry slope swords. And after the Air Force and the civilian services have been stood at ease, the massed bands will play Funeral March by J.H. Falch. As the parliamentary wreaths are laid, first of all, the Prime Minister, Mrs. Thatcher, on behalf of the government. Mr. Kinnock, on behalf of Her Majesty's opposition, one of the new generation of politicians born during the Second World War. The leader of the Liberal Party, Mr. David Steele, Leader of the Ulster Unionist Party, Mr. James Molyneux. Leader of the Social Democratic Party, Dr. David Owen. The Secretary of State for Foreign and Commonwealth Affairs, Geoffrey Howe, lays a wreath on behalf of the dependent territories, diminishing company of peoples, wreath made at the Royal Botanical Gardens in Kew. Now the High Commissioners of the Commonwealth. First of all, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, India, Sri Lanka, Ghana and Malaysia raise their wreaths to the west of the Cenotaph. And then the High Commissioners from Cyprus, Nigeria, Sierra Leone, Tanzania, Jamaica, Trinidad and Tobago, Uganda, Kenya. Formal wreaths from the Commonwealth. In May 1922, the Queen's grandfather, King George V, standing in an uncompleted war cemetery in France, took from his pocket an envelope. It was a small bunch of forget-me-nots sent to him by the mother of a dead soldier to be placed in her son's grave. And the King found the grave, laid the flowers upon it. And so, on most days of the year, in countries scattered across 5 continents, on birthdays and wedding anniversaries, at Christmas or at Remembrance Tide, a gardener of the Commonwealth War Graves Commission lays a wreath on some individual grave for a family thousands of miles away. A family wreath laid by an unknown friend in a faraway place. In Whitehall, the wreaths of faraway nations, belonging also to a family of sorts, are laid side by side on the cenotaph. Tonga, Fiji, Bangladesh, Bahamas, Grenada, Papua New Guinea, Eastern Caribbean states, Seychelles, Zimbabwe, Belize, and Brunei. And now on behalf of the 3 services, the Royal Navy, the Army, and the Royal Air Force, the 3 Chiefs of Staff will lay their wreaths when the Commonwealth wreaths are laid. Admiral Sir William Staple, General Sir Nigel Bagnall, Air Chief Marshal Sir David Craig. Now, on behalf of the Merchant Navy and Fishing Fleets, Cecil Finn, Vice President, Scottish Fishermen's Federation, lays a wreath. Captain Butterworth of British Airways for the Merchant Air Services, and Her Majesty's Chief Inspector of Constabulary, Sir Lawrence Byford, for the civilian services. When they have resumed their places, the Bishop of London will conduct a short act of worship around the cenotaph.
O Almighty God, grant, we beseech thee, that we who here do honor to the memory of those who have died in the service of their country may be so inspired by the spirit of their love and fortitude that, forgetting all selfish and unworthy motives, we may live only to thy glory and to the service of mankind, through Jesus Christ our Lord. Teach us, good Lord, to serve thee as thou deservest, to give and not to count the cost, to fight and not to heed the wounds, to toil and not to seek for rest, to labor and not to ask for any reward, save that of knowing that we do thy will, through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. Our Father, which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, in earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive them that trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. Unto God's gracious mercy and protection we commit you. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious unto you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace, both now and evermore. Amen.
The service and civilian contingents are brought to attention one by one. The household cavalry carry swords, and the trumpeters of the Royal Air Force prepare now to sound the morning call of awakening for those who sleep. The royal princes salute the Cenotaph, and Her Majesty the Queen, accompanied by the Duke of Edinburgh, Prince Andrew, Prince Michael of Kent, leaves Whitehall, moves back through the Guard of Honour of Queen's Scouts from Greater London, 18 boys and 2 girls, back into the old Home Office building. Bishop of London, with his chaplain and with the chaplain-in-chief of the Royal Air Force, and Canon Anthony Caesar, the sub-dean of the Chapels Royal, leaves Whitehall. The scarlet tunics of the children of the Chapel Royal gleaming in the sunlight. the youngest of those who have stood here to do honor to the men who died in 2 world wars and the women too. Wars which to them must be something from the history books. The Prime Minister, former Prime Ministers behind her, leaves with the Leader of the Opposition. Mr. Steele, Mr. Molyneux, Dr. David Owens, Geoffrey Howe, Lord Hailsham. Mr. Heath, Lord Wilson, Mr. Callaghan, Mr. Thomas, Dr. Paisley there, Mr. Britton, Mr. Lawson, Sir Keith Joseph, Mr. George Younger, Nicholas Edwards, Norman Tebbit, Lord Young, Kenneth Baker, John Stanley, Minister of State for the Armed Forces, Lord Trefgarne, Mr. Christopher Patton and Baroness Trumpington, Parliamentary Secretary for Health and Social Security. And the Chiefs of Staff now leave. The Major General, Major General Jim Eyre, commanding the Household Division, leaves Whitehall, having saluted the Cenotaph, with him the Brigade Major and his ADC. And the representatives of other denominations leave Whitehall. Father Seabrook, Roman Catholic chaplain at RAF Finningley, the chief rabbi, representative of the Free Church Federal Council, Methodist Conference, the Baptist Union, the moderator of the United Reformed Church, and the representative of the Unitarian and Free Christian churches, and the Salvation Army representative. As from the old Home Office building comes, I suppose for the last time, a chairman of the GLC, Mr. Tony Banks, MP, MP for Newham, Northwest, councillor for Wandsworth, Tooting. GLC in its present form, of course, ends on the 31st of March, 1986. And he returns to the Home Office. The President of the Royal British Legion, General Sir Patrick Howard Dobson, National President since 1981, former Vice Chief of the Defence Staff, a King's College Choir schoolboy, became a cavalry officer, served in Burma, the Middle East and Europe during the Second World War. And what a splendid record of service to ex-servicemen the Royal British Legion maintains, fighting on behalf of those who did not die in battle but survived to carry their problems and disabilities into old age, many of whom are too proud to ask for help. General Sir Patrick Howard Dobson lays the Legion wreath. A wonderfully erect, dignified figure. A great champion of ex-service men and women. And so the other Legion wreaths will be laid. The Royal Air Force Association, represented by Dr. McAllister from Northern Ireland, the Royal Naval Association by Mr. Joe Riley, OBE, carrying the wreath shaped like an anchor. British Commonwealth Ex-Services League, represented by Major General Earl Cathcart, Deputy Grand President since 1976. Royal British Legion Scotland, represented by Major General Sir John Swinton, distinguished soldier, formerly Major General commanding Household Division, and Mrs. Bigmore, OBE, familiar figure, laying a wreath on behalf of the Women's Section, Royal British Legion. Solitary figure representing London Transport, Inspector Bill Sparks, 61 years of age, served with the Royal Marines, one of only 2 survivors of the famous Cockleshell heroes who made a raid on shipping in mainland France with the special boat section paddling lightweight canoes up the Gironde River to Bordeaux in December 1942. And Churchill said their work shortened the war by 6 months. So he lays a wreath on behalf of the men of London Transport. And the preparations will now begin in Whitehall for the climax to this traditional, unchanging, and somehow very British ceremonial, the march past of the Royal British Legion. A good time, perhaps, to remind ourselves of some of those who came as friends and allies from far-off homes to stand with us in our time of trial and who died in our defense. In the military cemetery at Brookwood in Surrey, there are 6,000 graves from both World Wars. 3,500 of these are Commonwealth graves from the Second World War. Nearly 2,500 buried around the familiarly worded Stone of Remembrance under an autumnal blaze of maple leaves are Canadians. A padre from the Great War among them. And some survivors of the ill-fated raid on Dieppe who died later of their wounds. There are Australians, too. 447 of them. (230 from New Zealand, mostly in their 20s. These lie far from their island homes this morning. From the occupied nations of Europe they'd come too. 47 Czechs who flew with the Royal Air Force. This RT sergeant died less than a fortnight before his 26th birthday. From many nations they came. 83 Polish allies with their distinctive pointed headstones lie at Brookwood. 5.5 million Poles died during the 1939-45 war. 5 million of these were civilian casualties. 500,000 were killed in the armed forces. So many Britons die in Belgium. Here lie 45 Belgians from the Second World War. And nearby 243 members of the Free French forces. France, who lost so many of her own young men in the two world wars, 1.5 million in the 1914-18 war alone. And she has given in perpetuity a last resting place to an unbelievable 574,852 sons of the British Commonwealth in almost 3,000 cemeteries scattered all across France. And so with these memories of faithful friends from other countries, we come to the march past of our own Royal British Legion. And you can see there some of the 6,500 men and women of the three services who have come to march past this morning. And many distinguished units will be marching past for the very first time. Men from the Royal Navy, men from the Royal Air Force. Some for the first time representing the United Nations, 40 years old this year. And they could not have known when they set out this morning on a chill and bitter Sunday morning that the sun would shine as it does now to make this scene so impressive. Fame and glory. The bands play. Somehow the green leaves have clung to the trees despite the blustery winds of the last few days in London. The Royal Air Force wreath at the very front of the parade there. Marching this morning for the first time will be members of the 617 Squadron Association. We hope to see in the march past 23 wartime air crew, led by Group Captain Willie Tate, DSO, and 3 bars, DFC and bar. In its 2 years of wartime service, in a special duties role, the famous Dam Busters Squadron flew 76 operations, during which it lost 199 air crew. So the command is given, Royal British Legion by the centre, quick march. And led by the Executive Council in their bowler hats, carrying rolled umbrellas. The great march past begins to the old tunes. Tipperary, pack up your troubles. And in a place of honor this year, the Far East prisoners of war. Men who suffered so much and have survived to march today past the Cenotaph in Whitehall in memory of all their thousands of comrades who died so far from home. The Burma Star Association are here too, and 8th Army veterans, Netherlands Veterans Legion, and the War Widows. I've never forgotten the wreath I saw laid on the Cenotaph one Saturday afternoon, years ago now, which said, "In memory of my darling husband," and of the unknown soldier buried by his side. The Chindits, the British Commonwealth Ex-Services League, Chelsea pensioner there. The Royal Engineers Association, Railway Operating Company. Para Berry is there. The Officers Association. This is still the first column. How long they've been up, and how marvelous that men have decided to come while still they're fit and able to pay this tribute to their comrades. And the second column now approaching the Cenotaph, led by the Military Medalists League. And determined to be here they are, even though wheeled by another. And they bring their own courage to the Cenotaph in Whitehall. Many walking with sticks, as one realizes that so many of the veterans of World War II are now well into their 60s and into their 70s, when old wounds become sore. Airborne Recce Squadron and Para Squadron of the Royal Armoured Corps, RASC and Royal Corps of Transport, the Royal Tank Regiment, Sherwood Foresters, and members of the Royal British Legion, southwest, from the north, from Wales. Past the ensigns on the Cenotaph. At 100 paces to the minute, march. So proudly and with great dignity. And nice to see so many ex-service women there too. Applause for the men and women of St. Dunstan's, keeping the ranks, their arms linked, knowing by the quite natural applause of the bystanders that they are near the Cenotaph, and they too will turn their eyes towards a Cenotaph they can no longer see. St. Dunstan's, which for 70 years has done so much to make blind people able to live in the ordinary world. To see that the determination to be present is not thwarted by sickness or by age. Eighth Army veterans are here. Suitable tune for them. Green berets. The Parachute Regiment, always proudly represented. The commanders too, and the Rats of Tobruk, Normandy veterans, commandos, the Dunkirk veterans, they're all here. The Fleet Air Arm Officers Association, Royal Naval Association, Wrens, Royal Marines, the VADs, Royal Naval Association, 5,800 VADs sailed with the Royal Navy in hospital ships, nursing, Coldstream Guards Association, and quite a large detachment from the West Indian Ex-Service Association approaching the Cenotaph now. Royal Marines. Green berets, the Royal Marine Commandos. Men of the British Limbless Ex-Servicemen's Association, which has about 100 branches, formed in 1932. And how proudly they drive past the Cenotaph. The steps of the Cenotaph now blossoming red with poppies as the wreaths are gathered from the marching columns. The memorable Order of Tin Hats, Moth, Transport Auxiliary, the Royal Engineers, King's Royal Rifle Corps, Royal Signals, British Korean Veterans Association, the Air Gunners Association, Ex-Prisoners of War Association, the Inniskillings, Normandy Campaign Association. Longer and longer the columns have grown. In 1914, London buses were released by the London General Omnibus Company Limited for war service in France, moving troops to the front. Many drivers volunteered to go with them. They were sworn in as soldiers just off Whitehall at Scotland Yard and immediately left for France. In 1920, King George V inspected 35 London bus drivers who had come back from France, and afterwards commanded that a detachment of these drivers should always parade with the troops at the National Service of Remembrance to be held at the new Cenotaph in Whitehall. Only since 1951 have railwaymen too been included. But here they are at the end of this great march past. And so, what is Remembrance? A sentimental tune, a month at the turning of the year, a November week in the newspapers or on television, an hour in Whitehall, 2 minutes of silence on a Sunday. For some, Remembrance is all that, but it has got to be more. Elsie Harrison received one postcard from her husband after he was taken prisoner at Singapore in 1942. It said all that was permitted, I am alive and well. 40 years ago, in the autumn of 1945, a fellow prisoner of war brought her home Tom's cap badge. Another brought a scrap of paper. Thomas Harrison died 12/9/43, Tamarkan Bridge Hospital Camp, malaria and dysentery. 2 weeks tomorrow, Elsie, now 75, will stand for the first time by her husband's grave at Kanchanaburi, where the giant butterflies gather as the sun goes down. It is evening already in Burma and Thailand and along the River Kwai on this Remembrance Sunday.